Hello and welcome to Tavern Watch, where we talk about all things, well, basically that won't fit on any of our main shows. So tabletop, role-playing, sometimes miniatures. It all depends on what we're in the mood for. And occasionally there might be a comic talk later on in the distant future. Depends on how we feel. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Perez, and with me today are my two stupendous co-hosts with me. She's sometimes a gnome, other times she's creates mechanical dogs for D&D games, and sometimes she has a baby dragon. It's Liz Harper. How you doing today, Liz?
Howdy, doing great. Looking forward to talking about some D&D.
Fantastic. You know him, you love him. He's your favorite barbarian. Also joining me is Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm okay. I had a really weird lunch experience, and I'm just hoping to get into something nice and safe and calm like Dungeons and Dragons.
Totally known for its safety and its calmness. And joining us today is a special guest. We've had him on before, but he has come down from the Dark Tower, where he's scrying upon his orbs and all sorts of wonderful content on the internet. Greg Tito from Wizards of the Coast. How you doing today, Greg?
Good. How are you all doing? I'm very excited to be back and talk D&D and so much fun stuff that's happening.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you here. One of the reasons we wanted to have you on is because you just had a major book release, literally within the last couple days. Journeys through the Radiant Citadel. So we had some questions prepared and things like that, but I think I'll just open it with this. How has this book release been from your side compared to some of the others that you've had?
It's been a whirlwind. It's really great. Unfortunately, the book was delayed for a few weeks, so we got to prolong a little bit of the preview aspect of it. But that just allowed me to work more with some of the writers who are contributing to this book and really talk about what makes it special. And the response has been amazing. To seeing the community kind of come to life, seeing a adventure book that's an anthology of adventures that have a very different tone and feel than the traditional Western medieval fantasy that D&D is sometimes known for. So it's been just wonderful to kind of see this widespread excitement for something new.
And I swear you must have read one of my questions, because that is definitely one of the things I wanted to bring up. So Journey Through the Radiant Citadel marks, it's a pretty big milestone, let's be honest, right? All the creators involved are very culturally diverse. They bring a very unique perspective to the genre. You even mentioned it. It's been typically characterized and dominated by Eastern European folklore or history, and now we're starting to get away from that. And it seems like that's been a move that well, I shouldn't say away. You're adding to it. It's not the only thing anymore. And it seems like that's where a lot of the content that's been being produced lately has been moving, is to more culturally diverse creators, more interesting storytelling. Go ahead.
Quite frankly, I think Eastern European stuff would be new and surprising for D&D. Most Western fantasy is Western European.
Sorry,
very heavily.
I may have
Western
misspoke
European.
there. Apologies.
Because I'm thinking about like the myths of Perun, or the Slavic stuff, the Firebird, Russian mythology. There's almost no Russian folklore in D&D
yet,
and there's a strong amount of that stuff we could always see drawn upon. So I certainly would love to see more Eastern European. If you are Eastern European, we don't mean to forget you. I know weird people, and they will jump on me for this.
It's so funny. I have a writers group of people working on fantasy novels together, and one of them is Russian, I think actually of Ukraine descent. And she was writing a book that had a lot of this Russian folklore, some of which I'm unknown at all, but Baba Yaga and the kind of myth around her and her moving hut was mentioned. And two of the writers were like, what is that? I don't even know. I don't know that. And I'm like,
you knew it because it's in D&D. Yeah.
This is where my D&D comes together. Yeah, exactly. It was really,
I remember when I was writing my novel, I had a whole thing about Kashi Kashi the Deathless, and him putting his soul in an egg. And that's it's this really interesting thread. And I don't want to derail talking about Radiant Citadel, so I'll just say that.
No,
in fact, that actually leads me to ask one of my questions about Radiant Citadel.
Go for it.
Are you guys planning on expanding because there's a lot of stuff here. I honestly felt like you could do Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel 2 or 3 and really take some of this stuff and run with it. And there's a lot of modularity built into this book. Like there's, I think, 12 or 13 original founding civilizations that aren't present, and they could come back later. They could be rediscovered. Was that a goal to leave something where you could come back and do more?
I'm not sure that was the pitch, but I think that's where it has ended up, right? Where, whenever you're creating a book or any piece of creative artwork to a certain extent, there's stuff that's on the cutting room floor, right? Where like, oh, this was really great, but we just, we have to pick and choose what can fit into a 225 page book, right? And so some of the that material was sadly had to be cut, but it's like, man, it's got to see the light of day at some point. And so I think also the idea that dungeon masters could fill in the gaps, right? Like, I think there's something that 5th edition D&D has really embraced, which is like, we're going to give you tons and tons of stuff that you can use as inspiration, but here are some holes. Here are some things that we need the players and the dungeon masters to bring to life. It was present in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, for example, which had a lot of detail on many of the levels of Undermountain beneath Waterdeep, but sometimes those maps just went off the edge, and you're like, well, fill it in, see whatever is beyond there. We don't know. I think that kind of spirit is true here with Ajit George and Wes Schneider as they were putting this book together. Was like, there's no way we can put every idea that's amazing and fit it into the physical constraints of a hardcover book, but there is so much stuff to explore, stuff that people can add on their own. And I have to give a shout out to a lot of the authors who contributed to this book. They have published a few supplements of that type of material on the Dungeon Masters Guild as well. So not only is there this book and all the amazing stuff that you can jump into it now, but there is an additional supplement there that is full of some of the stuff you're mentioning.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about that a little bit too. Is we've seen a boon or a boot, or I don't even know if I want to call it that. Like, we've just seen like an increase in attention on more diverse creators, like especially through like the DM's Guild. Also, we've seen a lot of live play diversity as well, starting to pop up, which I think is really, really good, especially through some of the official D&D streams as well, which is always fantastic to see. So is this something we can just kind of expect to see more of? In general, is this
absolutely
something? Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't want to cut you off there, but like, I think that has been an important tenet of my tenure here at Wizards of the Coast, which was that D&D fans had a certain stereotype, even as recently as 2015 when I joined the company, where they were all mostly white, nerdy, unfortunately mostly male. Like, that was just still the way people talked about it when you mentioned D&D to someone who wasn't in the gaming industry. If they knew the brand, most people did, they associated with some of those negative stereotypes. And I'm so glad that over the last 7 years, that's kind of been banished, right? Like, people really think about Dungeons and Dragons as a storytelling framework. And then when you realize that, like, oh, we can tell all types of stories within this framework, beyond the Western European ones that we were talking about before, and we can start doing Eastern European ones and ones from inspired by nations along the Pacific Rim and things like that. Like, there's just so much wealth of myth and storytelling, and seeing it all come to life, I think is going to be the new norm for Dungeons and Dragons going forward, because it is a global game, right? Like, people are starting to really pick it up, not just in North America or English speaking countries. They are excited to, experience all of those myths and legends that have come from Western literature, but they're like, hey, now we can try to do that with some of the myths and stories that we grew up with and that are a part of our culture. And I think that just increases everyone's imagination and inspiration for going forward.
Yeah, and a personal note, this is something that the show that I'm part of on Sundays, we were very, very happy. And we actually talk about this a lot, especially recently, because everybody on the show is either a person of color or non-binary or LGBTQIA+. And seeing that increase in diversity has done nothing but sort of stoked the fires of creativity in all of us. And, it's like, okay, we're not just the outliers anymore. So it does mean a lot from us to see that that's, how things are. Like the diversity and the breadth of it is fantastic.
Yeah, and it's not just cultural too. Like I think there's really a lot about neurodiversity in Dungeons and Dragons, as well as people with disabilities and how they can go through the adventures and have heroes without having that limitation of like, oh well, you can't do that because you're in a wheelchair. I'm like, well, no, there's so many amazing things that people who are in wheelchairs can do, and I think that's the next opening of doors that I think Dungeons and Dragons can start to do.
All right, I'm just going to say right now, the Orumvirax is my favorite monster of all time. I'm going to be using them constantly from now on. You guys just get used to it. You're going to walk out to your door, Orumvirax going to fall on your head. No, one of the things I love about this book, and I want to let both Joe and Liz ask a lot of questions. I'm just going to say this much. I love the diversity of creatures in it. Not just, diversity in cultures is awesome. And I will steal from those cultures in my own games. In fact, we're talking about running a Radiant Citadel game where I'm kind of picturing it sort of like Deep Space Nine, where the players will use this Radiant Citadel as their base, and they will travel to other worlds. Because I'm going to stick a spell jamming thing in there too, because why not?
Totally.
But one of the things I really love about this book is that it has really different, really new, and some like I've seen Orumvirax used before, but a lot of the other stuff I've not seen, and that's just like, oh, okay, that's cool. Like there's a new type of celestial in this. There's a lot of different stuff in this book, and I don't think you could have got that without getting a lot of different people with different viewpoints and different backgrounds, because not everybody's heard of the same things, and unfortunately Tolkien casts a huge shadow. I mean, I'm not saying unfortunately because Tolkien's bad. I'm saying unfortunately because it means it's kind of like people said about writing. He used to say that writing in the South after Faulkner was like writing next to a mountain. Everybody had to notice that giant mountain. Even if you didn't mention the mountain, the fact that you weren't mentioning the mountain was important. And it's kind of like that with like D&D and like, fantasy in general with Tolkien. So I was really excited to see stuff that's completely not. It's absolutely different. And the Orumvirax is just adorable. So
I know, right? You can't go wrong with 8 legs and a ferret.
Yeah, it's a ferret with 8 legs, and is it evil? No, it's a ferret. But at the same time, maybe it's evil.
It's a Vulcan, of course it's evil.
Yeah,
or true neutral.
Your face, you're gonna get hurt. That's how it works. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. I think that's why it's so exciting for people who may have only been versed in Western fantasy to experience what's in this book, is because let's be honest, if you played Dungeons and Dragons for decades, oh, it's a ghost. Oh, okay, it's a orc. Oh, all right, I get it. It's a big bugbear. Like, there's not a lot that you can surprise players with if they're well versed in reading every single monster manual that's ever come out. But then you have the inspiration that comes from all the writers who were involved in this book, and they're coming up with stuff or infusing stuff that you may never have even seen before or even imagined before. And that kind of breath of fresh air is what every dungeon master wants to give to their players to surprise them, right? And so
the
I love
Bakunawa, if you're looking, I'm on page 147, the Bakunawa.
Yeah,
I love this thing. This thing is amazing. I am
Bakunawa, as Mackenzie Darmas has pronounced it in my presence.
I'm sorry if I butcher any pronunciations. I'm really sorry. I've never seen this word before.
No worries. Like all fantasy, I think any way you pronounce it is the right way.
But I love just everything about this thing, because it's fearsome. It's a dragon type creature, but no one will have any idea what to do with it. If I bring a red dragon out, people know, even if they don't let their character act on it, they know what a red dragon does. Very few people are going to know what this thing does.
Exactly. And then it becomes a whole fun, gaming experience of like, oh, how do we beat it? What do we need to do? What do we talk to it? How do we defeat this?
Yeah, exactly. So I really love that aspect of this book.
I mean, I also appreciate, not to jump in here, because I absolutely want to let Liz talk. I'm sorry, but seeing like the Pari in there, which seems like it's and again, if I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. But that's like from Parisian mythology, isn't it? Like seeing that
Persian, not Parisian.
Sorry, Persian.
Yes.
I have not had nearly enough coffee today. I am so sorry.
It's all good.
No, it
Yeah,
is
no, and
it's version,
talking to Justice Armand about wanting to develop the whole Shadow of the Sun idea is very, very interesting, and having this new type of celestial be a part of an adventure that is evocative of the way people think about Persia or Iraq, and how it can tell stories that are not the typical, like, oh yeah, go into that dungeon and kill all the monsters in it. Like, there's so much more to it. And then having angels be, potentially be antagonists or something that you're contending against is super interesting to me always.
Hey, Liz, you want
Liz,
to?
it's your chance.
See, the problem is I get to listening to y'all and then I forget to ask anything. I'm really curious. I have fewer questions about the Radiant Citadel in particular, and more about kind of like the direction Wizards is going with its books. Y'all have been putting out books at just this breakneck pace this year. We've had 3 books released this year, I think, 2 or 3, and we've got a couple more to go still. We're getting Spelljammer next month.
That's right.
Which is not far away. I don't know how the time happens. We have so much D&D happening. It's very exciting. But what I'm wondering is, how much is too much? What are y'all like? Can you speak at all about what y'all think about the pacing? Because it's exciting to get new content, but at the same time, it can be overwhelming, particularly if you're maybe a DM looking at these like increasing mountain of books and like, do I need that?
Yes.
Like, is there a happy spot for cadence here?
No, more. Always more.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really interesting thing. I mean, those of us who remember 4th edition, there was certainly a point where it felt like there was a D&D book coming out every month, and it was a breakneck pace. And I'm glad that there was a decision made back at the start of 5th edition, which was, let's not do that type of monthly release thing, because honestly, it would destroy the team and it's morale to be it would just be like in constant crunch mode. And then we decided to focus on larger books that had a high level of quality control, as well as graphic design and just like love put into them, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so back in the early 5th edition era, we had like 3 or 4 books a year. I think it was 3 really was the most. And so we've added like 1 additional book to that per year over the last couple of years. And that's just been because of our expertise has increased within the team as well. Some of the books are not developed fully in-house, if that makes sense. So we have one of the book releases this year was the Critical Role book called The Netherdeep, for example. And so that was certainly a D&D book. It went through all the rigorous playtesting and things that all of our D&D published books do, but it was mostly sourced through freelance writers. Similar with this book, Radiant Citadel, had all of the, I don't want to say quality control again, but like, that level of like polish that D&D books in this era have come to, that fans have come to expect from books in this era. But it was mostly generated by this wealth of writers that we've been talking about, right? And so I think the D&D team has become just more expert at project management, if that makes sense, to be able to come with this pace. Also, I agree with you. I think we're really reaching a point where it might be too many, but we have kind of shifted the way we talk about it to fans, saying that like, you don't. There's always going to be D&D fans out there who are collectors and feel like they need to have every release.
I feel called out.
Yeah, more power to you. I'm one of them. I've got a whole shelf. Brings me immense pleasure to continue to add to that collection. I love it, and I'm working on my older edition collections as well. That said, you don't really need every single book in order to run exciting D&D. My message to folks out there, if you're feeling like it is too much of a pace, pick the ones that are the most exciting to you. Like if everything that we've been talking about, Journeys Through Radiant Citadel, sounds like it's up your alley and would really make your players have a ton of fun, jump into that, right? But it's also okay to be like, hey, this is not my cup of tea. I'd rather wait for Spelljammer or Dragonlance, which is coming down later on this year, right?
I
Like,
have
there's-
questions about Dragonlance. We'll get to that.
We'll get to them. We'll get to them.
We certainly will, as well as Spelljammer too. But like I think there is this completionist idea that many gamers, myself included, have that I think can feel I don't want to say toxic, but it can sometimes
Overwhelming.
Yeah, right. It has that little bit of ness to it. So my advice is just follow your bliss. If you're really into one book, buy that one and love the crap out of that book. And then if you want to pick up the ones that you might have missed later on, sure, go ahead, do it. Or if you have a group that wants to play Spelljammer, pick it up then. You don't need to pick it up at release, in my opinion.
You are also doing something along that lines, real quick. Sorry, that I think is actually really important for people to also consider is like. Back when maybe years ago, like even during third edition, there wasn't a whole lot of like previews for stuff. Books were just came out. There might have been something in a magazine, like maybe in Dungeon Magazine or maybe in Dragon Magazine, that told you about what it was, but you basically had to wait till the book was released to actually know. But with a lot of the pre-release stuff that you guys have been doing now, you have preview copies that go out, you have content that you produce that talks about it and gives you a pretty darn good idea of what that content is to even before the book's released, to kind of for players to get an idea of if it's something they would be interested in. So there's maybe a little bit more information available. And then of course I always tell people, encourage them, if you are interested in a book, visiting your friendly local game store is always a great way to buy a product that you possibly would like, and also look through it because it's on the shelf ready to go, and support local play spaces as well. So tons of ways to avoid having to Pokemon the entire collection, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Oh, go ahead.
And the other thing about buying from your local game store is that they have these books with these unique covers that you will not find if you order off of like Amazon. And I've got to admit, I'm kind of hooked on these special covers because
Me too.
I used to look, at the pictures online and I'd be like, oh, that's okay. It's okay. I mean, I guess. But when you see them in person, all of the special covers are just so fabulous in a way that you cannot photograph. And now I want them all. It's a problem.
I know. It's almost like the opposite of what I said about, pick and choose what you want. You don't have to collect them all. But man, those special alternate covers only available through
they're
game
so
stores.
beautiful.
They are really, and they're so different too. I love that each one feels very much connected to the content in the book itself. Like I can't say enough wonderful things about the art direction of all the books in general. But then very specifically, those alt covers have been a huge, I don't know, just breath of something new for people to want to get their hands on. And you're right, Liz. Like once you actually hold those books, it feels very different than when you are just looking at mundane pictures on Twitter or something like that.
Yeah, I'm going to say up front that the Theros cover,
Still my favorite.
Theros alternate cover, is amazing. That's what it is. Absolutely, it's one of the few ones I spent money to buy the special cover after I had a regular copy, just because it's that good. Second for me would be Descent into Avernus, which I really love. Although Radiant Citadel with this kind of stained glass look, that's a close contender for possible second place. It's astonishingly well done. That actually does make me want to talk about something, though. You talked about earlier releases, and one of the things I was thinking about was like looking back over like the first couple years when you put out the Tiamat adventure. For a little while, I felt like the problem D&D 5th edition had was it didn't have enough just smaller scale adventure stuff. That all the adventures coming out were these huge things. And it's not that they were bad. Oh my God, no. Descent to Avernus is astonishing. I think the Rise of Tiamat stuff is very good. I think the Storm King's Vengeance?
Thunder.
Storm King's Thunder. That's a really good module. My favorite product until fairly recently was Tales of the Yawning Portal. Where you guys went back and took various modules from like D&D history and converted them to 5th edition, saving me the trouble, which by the way, thank you. Because I do a lot of that myself and it is always work. And I was wondering, is there at any point, are you guys thinking about putting out stuff that's slight smaller scale? Like that's not that Radiant Citadel is amazing, but it is a lot of adventures and there's a certain amount of interconnectedness you could put in. You don't have to. In fact, one of the things I liked about Radiant Citadel was that you could sit down, you could just pull an adventure out of this and run it, and you don't have to really even involve the Radiant Citadel in it if you don't want to.
True.
Like the one you were talking about, Sun and Shadow, I think was the one you were talking about, the one with the Pari in it.
Shadow of the Sun.
Shadow of the Sun, thank you.
Yeah.
That one you really would not be hard to do as like an adventure for a group. You could put that into like any campaign. Pretty much the entirety of this is stuff you could put into any campaign, which I thought was interesting. Any thoughts on like if that's going to be something going forward, or if you guys are thinking about doing smaller scale content, stuff that's more self-contained?
What you mentioned, Tales from the Yawning Portal, and that was a book that sold pretty well when it came out. But it was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like not the big release that year. I think it was Storm King's Thunder that came out later.
Yeah, it was Storm King's Thunder was absolutely
and so a lot of our marketing kind of muscle and evocativeness was devoted more to the giants and really cool characters from that adventure. And Tales from the Yawning Portal was just, was in the catalog, and then we started to realize over years and years and years that it continued to sell really, really well. People loved Tales from the Yawning Portal, and that was the inspiration to do Candlekeep Mysteries and now Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, and make sure that we still will have the larger, big adventures like Spelljammer and Dragonlance that are coming out this year. But we realized that the way people play D&D is just, as you said, just the smaller, being able, I just need something I can play right now, takes a little bit of prep time. We can add more to it and create a through line campaign if you wish, but it just needs to be something that we can play in a couple of hours with a little bit of prep, because
I feel bad
the amount of time that we have, right? And so
I feel bad that I forgot Candlekeep Mysteries because Liz was running it for us for a while, and it was really good.
Yeah. Ghosts of Selmarsh as well was one that was all about shorter adventures.
No,
Candlekeep was another one you could grab and you can insert into just about anywhere.
Yeah. So I don't know if we are gonna do something that is a smaller form factor or anything, going back to the way the way modules.
I didn't think
editions,
that.
but we are certainly always thinking about the way people play. And especially, you mentioned live play stuff earlier on, as far as how it brought out the amount of people who come from different backgrounds playing together. A lot of that was inspiration for Radiant Citadel specifically. I think people were like, hey, we need something that could just be played in 2 hours on a Twitch live stream that would have evocative storytelling that wouldn't necessarily be combat heavy or focused, that could be more about role play and how you solve problems without needing to bring out the miniatures and the gridded map space, right? And so that was certainly a inspiration, and it's why we used folks like Serena Marie as a writer. This is her adventure is the first one in this book that has a little bit more of a lighter tone with tons of humor in it, and that was certainly an inspiration to try to be like, all right, how are people actually playing this? Let's try to, create a product that is more for the folks who want those short, bite-sized adventures.
So on the other side of the coin, and this is sort of something that maybe I'm just reading too far into it, but I wanted to ask anyway. It seems like you might be potentially able to serve both long-term storytelling and short-term storytelling with some of the choices that you've been making. And I'm bringing this up because you just had, Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse. We just had Journeys to the Radiant Citadel. We have Spelljammer coming out. It seems almost like a way is being developed for players to very easily, attach their home brews to the, greater D&D universe that exists, and sort of maybe have this idea. Matt and I talked about this, was it last Sunday, about the Great Wheel cosmology where everything was interconnected?
Yeah, someone asked us, and we were like, quite frankly, we can't tell you about the D&D multiverse because it is too big and we don't know everything yet. I was actually going to ask a question about it, like if Spelljammer is going to serve kind of the same role that the Manual of the Planes did in previous versions of D&D. I'm thinking specifically the 3rd edition one that Jeff Grubb did, where basically it gives you an idea of what's going on. Not like it's not like telling everyone this is what everything is. It's just here are some places you might go, sort of thing. Is that like is that something I can ask? I don't know if you can talk much about Spelljammer.
Well, there's gonna be a lot more information coming out about Spelljammer soon. But what I can tell you is, and this is what we mentioned at the jump when we announced it, it's 3 volumes in one, and so it's designed to have. It's not necessarily like a new setting, but it's just something that you can use to expand your homebrew, as you said, or to go into completely new directions with your homebrew campaign. And so one of the volumes is just a bestiary with all the things that happen in the conception of the Astral Sea. So Spelljammer's changed a little bit in that we're not dealing with phlogiston and all that stuff and
crystal spheres and all that. Yeah, that was always annoying, quite frankly.
It's just more set in the Astral Sea, which was already a amorphous space with lots of interesting things in between the different hubs or realms that you might be going to in the Spelljammer. So it'll talk more about that and how you can run those campaigns. So one of the other volumes is just more on like just kind of background on our conception of how the Spelljammer space works and functions within the multiverse, and how you can travel from, say, the Forgotten Realms world of Choril to the other settings or other worlds or homebrew places that your adventures might go to.
Also, shout out for making Minsk and Boo multi-dimensional planeswalkers, because that makes me incredibly happy at a very giddy level.
I know, right? Of course they were. Maybe more Boo than Minsk. I feel like that's where all the power reigns.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah. He's a giant miniature space hamster. Come on.
Yeah, can't go wrong there. And then the third volume in Spelljammer is much more like what we've been describing in Radiant Citadel, where it's a series of short adventures that have a continual through line. It's a little bit more linear in that you go from one adventure to the next, but it's designed to be more episodic, right? A little bit like those old pulp Flash Gordon type of stories that would be like, all right, hey, did you find out what happened last time? And there's rules and recommendations for how to give recaps and end on cliffhangers and all that, so that you have I think it's 12 adventures that can feel a little bit like a 12 episode season of Spelljammer in space. So we're trying that out a little bit differently because of the demand for what you're talking about, right? Where people want to be able to do X, they want to be able to do Y. Here's the product where you can do all that with all the amazing tools and things. It's not quite the manual of the planes that you're talking about in that here's how the whole cosmology works, but it is giving the most of those tools and definitely the inspiration to kind of create that.
Cool. Unfortunately, my cat just climbs in my lap and is licking my beard, so I'm having a hard time getting words out. But I do want to let Liz talk, because I know she had some D&D Beyond questions. So I'm going to actually start with a slight D&D Beyond question. Since you guys have picked up D&D Beyond and fully integrated it, I'm assuming, or at least planning to fully integrate it, what led you to that? Can you talk about why, when you guys decided this shouldn't just be an outside company, this should be something we control? How did you get there?
Well, they were already a very close license partner of ours. We don't allow just anybody to sell our Dungeons and Dragons content, right? We have a very specific way in which we want that to get to the consumer, and so that's why we've worked with D&D Beyond when they were starting up. We had a lot of talks about how that was going to be the future. I think all of us were a bit surprised at how all of a sudden the future was here in 2020 when so many of us had to communicate online in order to play only during the pandemic. And so I think there was just the idea that there is so much amazingness that D&D Beyond was doing that we wanted to just more closely partner with them and work with that team in order to expand all the amazingness that the team was able to put together, right? Because there's been a couple of digital ways to play Dungeons and Dragons before. There's a lot of ways digitally to get stuff. I was a huge fan of the character builder in D&D Insider for 4th edition, and I think D&D Beyond did that and more in a much better way, a much more integrated and fun way, as well as it's you can't really deny it. It was certainly a part of the growth of the D&D audience, where it was like, oh, I don't have to sit for 2.5 hours with a calculator and a pencil and scribble on a piece of paper in order to create a character. I can do it in 10 minutes with some questions that are being asked by an online form that's a little bit easier to understand than all that. So I think it removed barriers to people jumping into the game and playing it and getting excited about the products that we were coming out with that would inspire even more storytelling and more characters to be made. And so I think we were always impressed with the tools, and then now that it's part of Wizards proper, we're just going to see more and more development and exciting stuff coming from that team.
Liz, go.
I mean, one of the great things about D&D Beyond is you can make a character with a single click because there is a random button. And I keep threatening that we should do a campaign where everyone just hits the random button and that's what you play for the campaign. I haven't done that yet, but I was wondering how y'all have been dealing with integrating D&D Beyond. I'm not talking about the character creation, which is great, perfect, honestly, on its own. But D&D Beyond always created great blog content. They wrote great articles. They had great videos. Is that kind of getting rolled more into the main Wizards of the Coast brand? Or are you kind of pushing D&D Beyond to keep going with its own identity? Because it has always made really, really good content, which I think has been overlooked because the character creator is so great. I think that made sense as a question. Hopefully it made sense as a question.
Well, I mean, a little bit what you're talking about is content marketing, which is a word that doesn't make me happy for some reason. I don't know why, but it is that idea of hey, these are people who are excited about the same stuff that fans are excited about. Let's bring them in-house and give them all the tools and, honestly, a peek behind the curtain a little bit earlier than we might have when it was even just a licensed partner. When they were licensed, we certainly let them know about what was upcoming, so that they could plan some of that stuff. But they also were like, can you give us more? And we're like, sorry, we couldn't. But those no's are now all turning to yeses, of course. And here's what's happening, 3 years down the line. So they have a lot more, just the inspiration to create that type of content going forward, and working with Joe Starr and Amy Dolan and Michael Galvis, a lot of the wonderful content creators over there, has just been a dream. They were great to work with before, and now it's hey, we're on the same email server, and we can just message each other in teams, and so a lot of it's been a lot more just collaborative in that way. And then plus we have Todd Kenrick, who was at the forefront of all of the video content that was coming out of D&D Beyond back when it was new, and he is now a content contributor for Dungeons & Dragons specifically, and is making wonderful stuff there too. And so it does feel like, I don't want to use the term again, but the content marketing kind of zeitgeist is moving forward, and it's just going to create more and more fun stuff. And now we get to integrate things from the movie and all that. So it's honestly been just wonderful, and removing barriers between great fans of D&D talking about it to other fans is what I'm all about.
It's kind of funny the way you're doing that, because it sounds like you're talking about this. I'm talking in my normal voice, content marketing. Your normal voice.
I mean,
someone's dubbed in to do the content marketing part. And then what we do is
that was Asmodeus coming in right there.
I think we all kind of do something like that when we're talking about something we're really excited about, and then our brain has to switch back into corporate speak, and you kind of amp the excitement way, way down.
Human asset management.
Well, that's my my English major creator personality having to be in a corporate environment. That's what you're seeing in real time here.
Yeah. But we mentioned the D&D movie. How about that D&D movie trailer?
I know.
Honor Amongst Thieves, which is coming out, I believe, in 2023. The trailer just dropped at San Diego Comic-Con this week, and wow, I mean, we've had D&D movies before, but it's really...
I liked that movie. I'm not saying I liked it because it was good. I'm just saying that I have warm memories of watching it with a friend, and both of us staring at the screen and staring at each other and then staring at the screen like, what is happening? How is Jeremy Irons so bad in this? So let's move away from Jeremy Irons being really bad in something too. Yeah, how did this even happen? Like how did you get this movie to happen? I know you didn't personally go and make it happen, but
I did. It was all me. No,
good job.
It
Great work,
was,
yeah.
It's an exciting thing. I have to admit, I have not actually seen the original Dungeons and Dragons movies. I think in my brain, I was like, you know what, these are going to be not good, and I'm going to be disappointed.
I'm going to tell you now. If you ever have a time with a bunch of friends where you guys are going to get a little tipsy, sit down and watch it then.
I feel like I've missed I've missed my window. Like, I feel like if I did that now, even if I was inebriated, it still would be a bad movie. And
it's a bad movie. There is no discussion of this not being a bad movie. Any movie where the best performance is by
Marlon
a man
Wayans
wearing blue lipstick.
I don't know. Marlon Wayans was pretty good in that one.
Wayans was unbelievably bad in that.
Bad. Yeah,
but he was bad in a way that you'd comprehend that a human being in this situation would be bad at it. Like, you could just imagine him going, I can't see literally anything. All this stuff is bad CGI, so none of it's actually happening. I have to pretend I'm drowning in a rug. So I got that. But everybody else was bad in a way. It's like they all got hit with a tranquilizer dart before they got on set and had a chip implanted in their brains that caused their emotions to spike in weird directions. But the trailer you guys just showed for your new movie, people are acting.
Yeah.
That's like, wow. So, yeah, talk more about this.
I got to see that trailer a couple of weeks ago. It was still in prep mode, so like not all the effects were perfect. They were still working on them, but I loved, probably beyond anything else, even though like the owlbear is so cool and game breaking, as well as like the black dragon and like all the kind of like nods to things I thought were amazing. But I think my favorite part of that trailer is the choice of music. I think using Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin was an inspired choice.
Absolutely.
It got me excited about it. It reminded me of how Taika Waititi in the trailer for Thor Ragnarok used Led Zeppelin. Like, it evoked all of those wonderful, how many times people of a certain age, if you've played D&D, there was some Led Zeppelin playing in the background for 95% of those game sessions back in the 80s.
My first D&D game that I ever played was literally, I think it was Led Zeppelin 2 was playing on the CD player in the background. Like,
how could you not, right?
Yeah.
And then when you get to like Battle of Evermore and all that, like it's such, the fantasy is in that music. So it was
just listen to any Dio lyric. Dio, basically, metal at that time was writing about D&D.
Right?
Yeah.
And then to have like Chris Pine's character be a bard, I just really loved. I thought that was
loved
really
about
smart.
that was the bit where she's like, "So, but what do we need you for?"
Yeah.
I make the plans, but the plan's been made. Well, if the plan doesn't work, so you make bad plans then?
Yeah.
And it's like, he also plays the lute. That's not really important. And it cuts to a picture of him playing the lute. I love that. That's so genius. Because
it was genius.
It's not one of the things I'm playing a bard right now in a game. And they're hard to play, by the way, but they have all sorts of tricky stuff. But one of the things I like about playing the bard is that you can do things other than, like, you pretty much do anything. Like, you could be a stabby bard if you wanted, or you can be like a magician type bard, or you could just mix and match. But one of the things I loved about that was just that idea that bards, he's playing away from the stereotype, but at the same time, it's Chris Pine.
Mm-hmm.
So he has the stereotype because you look at him and he played Captain Kirk. So you're thinking that weird stereotype that's evolved about bards trying to sleep with literally everything, and you have Chris Pine play one.
Yeah.
You have Captain Kirk as your bard. Come on, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Without them hammering it,
Yeah, right. They didn't really lean into that too much. Like, he wasn't really like the schmoozy guy, but you could tell he's the face, right? Like, he's the person who is going to talk to the bad guy first, right? Like, that's just and that's you mentioned how bards are basically jacks of all trades, and like, yeah, they can do that, but really the thing that they're best at is persuading people and getting them to go along with your plans and do that, which is was front and center in there. I love the cast.
Michelle Rodriguez,
so good. Her enthusiasm and all the interviews I've been seeing from San Diego Comic-Con, I feel like she's the one who's like the most old school D&D player out of all of them.
Didn't she do a bunch of movies with Vin Diesel? Doesn't he make people
movies
play
with Vin
D&D?
Diesel,
He makes them play D&D on set.
Yeah. And that's something that Chris Pine said too. He had never played before, and he when he got this role, he said he played with his nephews, I think. And he said something in an interview that I was like, God, I want to just shout this from the rooftops. He said every creative cast of people getting together should play D&D before they play, even if it's not a fantasy action movie like this movie is, because it's such a good world building or team building exercise. Like they basically are just doing controlled improv. And I'm like, yes, say that more. Do that in all the junkets. Get more people playing D&D, please. I thought that was wonderful.
That's some good corporate synergy.
I mean,
Right?
I legit got a job because the guy interviewing me asked me my hobbies, and I told him that, well, D&D is one of them. He's like, "Are you a game master or are you a player?" And I said, "Well, I generally game master." He's like, "Oh, so you're used to corralling about like 6 to 8 unruly people regularly?" And I was just like, "Yeah." He's like, "Great, that's a win in the column for you." Like, it's a life skill. It absolutely is.
Oh, it totally is. Yeah, no, and that's why we're seeing the and this is what we hope the movie will do when it comes out next year, is draw even more people from the mainstream into what is exciting about this game, right? Because it does so many things. We talked about this before. It does so many things that you don't even know it's teaching you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you're learning about corralling people and getting them to show up week after week. You're learning about how to take people from different varied backgrounds and different skills and put them into practice and improvise when things don't go your way, right? Like those are just all things you need in life. You need them in your career. You need them in relationships. And D&D teaches all that without hammering you over the head with it. Like it is just like, oh yeah, I'm practicing social skills, but I'm also casting fireball and destroying all the bad guys at the same time.
I still remember how disappointed my mother was to find out there was absolutely nothing satanic about it. She's like, "You mean I've been totally supporting you in this hobby despite your father's objections, and there's nothing? It's math. It's mostly math." Yeah, I'm sorry. Like, and she picked up the player's handbook at one point and was reading through it because she had got it for me, but she hadn't read it. So she picked it up and read through it, and she's like, "Back guano? Back guano? Your character is carrying back guano around." "Oh, I'm not. I use a sword, Mom. I don't do this spell." She's like, "Why the heck would you not do this spell? It's by 9th level. You'll clearly be superior." But she like, my mom was a trip, but yeah, she was like totally going through the original player's handbook and just was very disappointed that the whole time she'd been supporting me in this rebellion to annoy my father, it turned out that it was mostly math and learning how to be friendly. So
it's true.
I mean,
So yeah, I'm really hoping the movie does more of that and just gets more people to jump in and want to play.
the thing that seems so hard about making a D&D movie, or a movie that feels like an actual D&D game, is that D&D games are chaos. They are chaos. If the players make a plan, they're going to spend, an hour and a half making a plan that has nothing to do with what's actually going to happen. And then they're just going to make crazy stuff up on the fly based on, I don't even know what goes on in players' heads when they decide to, rescue the kobold that they were supposed to kill, and then they make a bunch of kobold friends who now live in their basement, which is an actual thing that actually happened in a campaign we're playing right now.
What you see tomorrow.
I feel like the trailer kind of captured that a little bit with talking about the plans,
exactly.
but also like I don't know the ins and the outs of the plot. I'm only getting it from the trailer that you all saw, so I'm not giving anything away. But my theory is that like the first part of the movie, they're doing the heist to get that artifact, and then they realized they screwed up and they should not have done that, right? And so then now they have to do.
You mean that kindly old man that I stole the crown for, that clearly told me there was nothing I should worry about, even though his eyes were flashing orange, was a problem? Oh man,
exactly right.
Well,
don't trust Hugh Grant, I think is the.
Well, yeah, well, you all knew that. I've seen Notting Hill. But one of the things that I've always said, one of the movies I always hold up to people is you should watch this movie before you play D&D, is The Mummy, the Stephen Sommers remake from the 90s. And you'll note that that's exactly what the plot to The Mummy is. They go out to a lost city to find this like fabulous treasure and release this horrible thing, and then they have to fix it. That's note for note the plot to The Mummy.
Yeah.
And I think that is likely what we're going to get. And that it is, quite frankly, one of the best things you could do for a D&D.
True.
Mummy is so good for this that I can tell you what class everybody is. Like, Rick O'Connell there, clearly a fighter. Amit Bey, definitely a ranger. Evie looks like probably like a lore bard with some rogue mixed in. Her brother is straight up rogue. No,
Straight
there's
up
no
rogue.
disputing it. That guy is a rogue.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, it's still. I'm hoping that this becomes one of those movies for me, like this one in Willow. Like Willow and The Mummy are movies I still show people. Say, okay, this is your D&D game. Just think about this, and I would
Willow
love it.
holds up, man. I watched it again recently. Actually, I've watched it like 2 or 3 times over the last year since it's been on Disney Plus, and man, it's so good.
One of my employees told me he had never seen it because he's a little young for it. So I literally scheduled a meeting, sat him down in a room, and put it on the TV, and that was his training for the day. And yeah, it still holds up. It's so good.
It's great, and I'm actually excited for that reboot too. Like going back to those characters. I need them to show Val Kilmer though, but that's the only.
Yeah, but I feel really bad for Val Kilmer.
I know. Did you watch this?
Yeah, I did.
Found footage thing, right? Like that's so interesting.
Yeah. But to get back to like talking about the actual Dungeons and Dragons stuff.
Yeah. I think this movie is going to be really, really exciting. I love the direction. It's a little bit hard for me because my love of this game is not really about the lore, right? It's not really about the characters that are in there. It's about what you all have been talking about, which is that like back and forth between players and the story that you're telling together. So I'm still holding out for my dream D&D project, whether it's a movie or a TV show or whatever, with that has more of the showing what's happening in world and what's happening out of game, right? And how those two interact with each other. I think that's such a beautiful idea that really only D&D embodies. I'm still very excited about this movie. I think it's hitting all the right notes, but it's only showing half of what makes D&D cool in my mind.
Yeah, if the game started with basically the actors all sitting down in front of a table and creating characters, and then we watch the show, and every so often someone's like, someone does something and they fail, and then it cuts to the table. He's like, "Oh, what do you mean I didn't make the roll? Like you rolled a 2. You rolled a 2, Chris. You're not going to make it on a 2. I don't care. I'm a bard, so I automatically get a 10 on that roll, and that means that with my bonuses, that's a 19." And then you cut back to in-game in the movie, and Chris Pine's character manages to pull off his bluff because he is a bard. Like that could be cool. I don't think that's going to happen, but I get what you're talking about. That would be really fun.
It would be fun.
I mean, D&D in the end, it's not. As much as I love dragons, it's not about the dragons. It's not even about the dungeons. Oh my god! It's about. It is literally the friends you make along the way. You're sitting together with a bunch of friends at a table or at a virtual table, and you're telling stories together. You're doing fun stuff together, and that is D&D.
And sometimes you're saving the world if you like Stranger Things. It's fine.
Or sometimes you're accidentally destroying the world, and then you have to scramble and try and fix it again. It's just how it goes.
Like you do. No, I agree. I think there's so much drama that could be told if it was about the relationships around the table and then how those were expressed both out of game. Like there's so many coming of age stories that we could tell, but then having that be contrasted with what's happening in the more, linear fantasy that's telling at the same time. And again, how those interact with each other, kind of like what Stranger Things has done with that group from earlier, but just more focused on being a kid at that time,
Okay.
Yeah, that's my dream. But one day, maybe we'll get that. The sequel is like, oh yeah, but this was just actually about the person who was trying to be Chris Pine in their basement.
I am really looking forward to it, but it does sound like we need to wait a year to find out how well it pulls it off. But it's really fun. So far, it's fun.
Yeah, and this was just the first teaser trailer, right? There might be 1 or 2 more. I mean, if they're following the big blockbuster action movie thing, there's going to be probably 2 or 3 more trailers. Some more information coming out. This was just the first big taste, but so far it's been interesting seeing that the most conversation about it from D&D fans is, "Hey, that's an owlbear."
Yeah, I'm sitting there like,
wild shape into an owlbear.
That's a tiefling druid wild shaping into an owlbear. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I was too. I was like, guys, you've never heard of the rule of cool? Like this makes it the most 5th edition D&D property ever.
Oh, hard agree. That's one of those things that I think is one of the joys of 5th edition, more so than I think 4th edition, which while Matt and I have talked about a lot, is it was better than people remember it as, and there's a lot of DNA there that sort of became foundation work for 5th edition. You can absolutely see it if you look. But
Sure.
5th edition is about embracing that ridiculousness, right? Like, and you even see it with some of the books that are coming out now with like the extra classes or subclasses and variations that you can go, but it's all about having fun. And it definitely seems like recent publications have really tried to push that as well. Like I brought up Mordenkainen's earlier, but you had Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, you had Mordenkainen's, you have all these books that are encouraging players to essentially take core ideas and then make them their own, whether it's coming up with alternate backgrounds for whatever class you want to, or race you want to play as, getting rid of traditional racials, which I think was a fantastic idea, really embracing backgrounds and customization. Like there's a lot of that, and you can do some really fun, unique things and really have characters personalize themselves to whatever they want, right? It's no longer, I'm just playing an elf ranger. It's, you know, in Liz's case, she's playing a, Dragonborn Ranger. Go ahead, Liz.
A Dragonborn Drake Warden that has yes, instead of having like the Drake Warden is supposed to have like a spectral dragon or some sort of like a conjurable dragon, but she has like an actual baby dragon that she rescued. And there's another rule of cool thing. I went to Matt and I said I had this idea about this Dragonborn who's raised in this place where there are a bunch of dragons, and she rescued a baby dragon egg, and Matt's like, sure, let's do it. Sounds cool, we'll do it.
Yeah, I think that's why am I going to argue about that, you know? Oh, you want to give me a hostage? Sure.
That's a plot starter. That's what that is.
Yeah, I know. If you hurt my adorable baby dragon, Matt,
you don't hurt
you
it.
Have now. You have
danger.
10. You have 10 adorable baby dragons now.
Yeah, the adorable baby dragon thing kind of snowballed, and now there are a lot of adorable baby dragons.
They're not going on all the adventures with you. Trust me.
Just because neither of us wants to control 10 baby dragon NPCs at the same time, no one wants that.
But I love that shift in philosophy from the. I mean, I think we've kind of really torn away the last vestiges of the wargaming mentality that D&D kind of sprang from, right? Yep. Where it was like more of a punishing thing. Oh, you got to get through this gauntlet, of this dungeon in order to level up your character. And it's by this mature state of 5th edition here, we are very much in the like, let's do what is fun. Of course, there still needs to be some game consequences to certain actions, but yeah, why not? And that's why I've really loved all the optional rules that have been put forth in Xanathar's Guide as well as Tasha's Cauldron, where it's just like, play whatever you need to. Like, well, there's no restrictions, because how is it fun to be like, oh, you can't be a paladin because you are a drow, right? Like, what? That's not fun. Let's tell fun and exciting stories with no limits.
Yeah, like
literally some of the biggest books that have ever come out under the D&D name are about a moody but ultimately heroic drow. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, and even us, we have a player who's now a drow druid, but is like, it's not something you would typically see. And like, it's all about fun. It's all about having sort of that play experience where everybody's just having a good time. And I really like that, because that's always what it was for us, at least in my groups growing up. And then I think it was more the people, and this is not to disparage it, but like the Adventurers League around here was very much hard by the book. And so when that started happening, it wasn't really a fun experience, because especially for newer players, like they would want to do something cool and it'd be like, no, there's no rules for that. You can't do that. And again, it might've been just the people, but like now the book's basically codifying, no, have fun, prioritize fun. I think it's exceptionally important, especially with the limited amount of time we get to have fun with friends. It's a big thing, at least for me.
For sure. And I think there is something to be said for people whose fun comes from simulation type style games, right? Like, so it's also another big thing that has changed or grown in the community is this idea of session zero, or just making sure that you are playing the game that everybody at the table wants to play is basically the tenet there, right? And so I think you can find your game. I think you can find the one that, if you want one that has more restrictions or that is more adherent to the rules as written, you can find that. you can find a dungeon master with players who are on the same page with you, and you can all have fun with that together. If you want a game that's much more open-ended and following the rule of cool and wants to experiment with all types of yes-anding throughout the game and the character creation, you can find that too. And I think that's what's really exciting, is letting people understand that the style of game and the style of the players that you are around the table with matter just as much as, party makeup and, whether people are free on a Tuesday night and things like that, right? Like, I think that's been really interesting to see with this growth of people and different backgrounds coming into the game, is that now there's just so many different styles to play, and there might be different. You might be into one style now and change your mind and play one. Hey, I want to play a different style next time, right? I want to do more of a horror-based game that's a lot more about taking away of resources rather than just giving them to people. And the best part about it now is that people now have a vocabulary with which to talk about those things and kind of level set.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you bringing up like the session 0 thing, and that's something that our very first Tavern Watch we talked about. We talk about it a lot. We've actually had a lot of questions about it over the last year, at least, as far as us covering tabletop stuff. It's something that is really, I feel, important to the play space, because, like you said, there's something for everybody as long as you can vocalize what you want. And having that conversation and making sure everybody's on the same page, making sure everybody's getting what they want out of it is very, very important. Because if you have a party of 6 people and 5 people are having a good time and one person isn't, to me, that's a failure, because that one person's feeling excluded when they shouldn't, right? So I'm happy to hear session 0 being discussed.
Yeah,
or at least
and it's interesting because it's been something that's been talked about in the community, and this is where I love that the both the designers on the D&D team as well as the freelancers that are brought in to work on D&D products are infusing some of those ideas from the community. And that I think it was actually in Van Richten's guide to Ravenloft, was like, have a session 0. If you're going to be dealing with these horror elements, you got to make sure you're all on the same page. And I think, to my knowledge, that was the first time it was mentioned in an official Dungeons and Dragons product, the idea of a session 0. And I just think that's going to be continuing going forward. And it's funny how I, pay attention to the community and talk with those folks all the time on Twitter and listen a lot. The idea of a session 0 was not new to me, but I met someone, I think, who said, oh yeah, I first learned about that when I read Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I was like, oh my gosh, of course, that makes total sense. There are going to be people who are only learning about things at a different pace. And when it's written into an actual D&D book that people, grab for their play group, it just adds to that community knowledge and contributes and kind of spreads it out farther. So I love that stuff that is taken for granted in certain parts of the community is now introduced to a much larger group, and that trend is just going to keep continuing.
And the interesting thing for me too about that is because it shares a parentage, I guess you would say, or like a lineage with Rule 0, which is a thing from the other side of the company that you're at, with Magic the Gathering, and that's something that's been around for forever, right? It's the Rule 0, discuss what type of game you're gonna play. And there was a lot of people that I was talking to in one of the local stores that were really gung-ho about session 0, but like were disparaging Magic the Gathering. I just casually mentioned is like, well, session 0 is Rule 0, and their eyes just kind of like, wait, what? And I explained it, and their eyes just kind of got real big. It's like, oh, it's like, yeah, that it's not like it used to be. Everything is it's all about player choice. Doesn't matter what the game is anymore. It's about everybody being on the same page. So,
yeah, I love that.
I'm going to jump in because I mentioned I was going to ask this, and the time has come. Dragonlance, you guys announced, I think, like last year, or was it this year? Oh my God. I can't tell time. Yeah, the universe. When you announced it was, I think it was February of this year. You announced 2 Dragonlance projects. One would be an adventure, and one is a tactical game. Yeah. What can you tell us, if anything, about this, aside from the fact that it's happening? Is there anything you can tell us? If you're not, that's fine, but I'm going to ask because it's Dragonlance.
I'm going to tell you it's really cool. That's about all I can tell about it. There's going to be a lot of information coming out soon, but I mentioned simulation games and how you kind of need to get everybody on board with doing it. I think this idea of having the War of the Lance occurring and then being able to have a tabletop D&D session, and then be able to take that session when it gets to a battle or gets to something that's a little bit more larger scale, be able to play that out on a tactical, battle game that's got a lot more board game aesthetics to it. I just think that's really cool. I love that idea of going from macro level to a micro level and back and forth in between that on a spectrum is just super interesting to me. So it's going to be new. I mean, I think I mentioned how the Spelljammer way it's being presented with 3 volumes in a slipcase with a Dungeon Master screen. The way that Dragonlance is being presented is also very different, with having an adventure book and this companion battle game along with it. I just think it's going to be so cool and is a nice way to evolve the game, right? It's not just another adventure that you can just roll up and play. As fun as that would be in Dragonlance, it's adding something new and exciting to that formula that hasn't been seen before. To my knowledge, there has not been a product that is a tabletop role-playing adventure coupled with a more tactical board game style thing, right? And then you'd be able to go back and forth between those and have your party interact with both of those. I just think that's so fun. Like I said, there's a lot more information that's going to be coming soon, but that's the thing that's got me really excited about Dragonlance.
Cool. One last thing for me, and then I'll let somebody else talk. You guys had James Wyatt back on staff, right? Over at the D&D side of it. He put out, before he moved back on, he put out things called Plane Shift.
He did.
For the various Magic the Gathering worlds. Is there any chance of those getting I know that they exist and they're PDFs. Any chance of that getting a release of some sort at some point? Or is that something that I should start bugging you guys about?
Well, that's pretty much what Theros and Ravnica had been, right?
But
they were just
the
that
other
writ large.
ones, but you still have a lot of basically what I'm getting at is you guys have all this Magic content that you have started using, and Magic has started using D&D content. At some point, is that something you're going to keep doing going forward? Are you going to move towards having that content be across because you were just talking about how you're doing an adventure and a tactical game in one thing, and it just made me think about, are you moving towards having content that exists in both at once?
Well, I think I can't really speak to future plans on that specifically, but I can point to how I'm excited that those silos are no longer silos, right?
Yes.
I think
we talked about that last time you were here. Yeah.
Yeah. Just how it was always this unwritten rule for
never
some
the
reason
two should meet. Yeah.
And then James just walked around and was like, "Hey, can I do this?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure. I don't see why not." No one told him no. He basically went around to the various people in the Wizards of the Coast office, and no one said no. So he's like, "Sure, I'll do it then." And so I just love that those barriers are down and that we now have the Adventures of the Forgotten Realms Magic cards, and then the newly released Battle for Baldur's Gate Commander set.
Very good set, by the way.
Yeah, with just tons of great evocative. You mentioned the Minsk and Boo stuff. But
I'm literally building a Tasha the Witch Queen deck. As we I was getting cards for it earlier today. Right? It's Tasha.
Yeah,
it's Tasha. How could I not? Right? It's good. It's good that the barriers are down.
Right, because there's so much great storytelling and world building for both Magic and Dungeons and Dragons. So, of course, why wouldn't we want to experiment with both and jump into them when we can?
And the interesting thing about that, and I know you can't speak of future plans, but I was just thinking about this because we just had the big release the preview yesterday for the Wizard stuff for the upcoming sets, where they're now talking about doing multi-set story arcs again, finally. With Dominaria United, and I'm sitting here thinking Dominaria United, which was the OG setting, Dominaria, the OG Magic setting, was always ripe for a D&D setting, and if they can get to this point where they bring that stuff in and bring the stuff with the Cabal and bring the stuff in with Nicobolas and all that other stuff into a D&D setting, especially with all the other stuff that's coming out. I know Nicobolas is a giant planeswalking dragon. We just had a giant dragon book that talked about how dragons are multi-dimensional. There's a lot of stuff that would just seems like it marries together really, really well. And like I said, I know it's one of those things where you can't talk to future plans, but I know me personally, if there was ever to be a Dominaria setting released, I think I would just lose my mind.
there's so much great storytelling in those early settings, and I've met fans who've like, oh yeah, I didn't play a lot of Magic, but I read the Magic novels, and I was like,
Yeah, I still have them on my shelf.
Novels?
Yeah.
I didn't even know those existed. So yeah, there's a lot there, and I just love the idea now that Spelljammer is coming out. That I mean, we've kind of planted this seed, and I think a lot of people's headcanon kind of went along with it. That the D&D multiverse and the Magic planes and multiverse are compatible, right? Like you can go from the space that surrounds Theros and then travel in a Spelljammer to the Forgotten Realms. You could travel to Athos. You could travel to Innistrad.
You said the magic word with Athos.
Yeah. Right. And I just love that people can take, go into the older annals of D&D settings and modernize it if you want, or just keep it as is. And maybe when you go into that world, you're all of a sudden in second edition rules for some reason. Like there's so many fun things you can do with the idea of spell jamming and going in between worlds that I would love people to start using, even those old plane shift, right? We go back to, I think there's an Ixalan one. You could go to the world of Ixalan.
I have all of them. I've got all of them downloaded. I even wrote an article for our site talking about it because they're not play tested, but they're great. But at the same time, I ran some of it and I destroyed a party, and I'm like, oh, I definitely should have thought really hard about that. Yeah, there's a lot to them. I've never played Magic. In fact, I don't really like card games all that much. I'm not sure why. The world's amazing. I just haven't played the game. It's the same thing with Warhammer. I've never played a Warhammer thing, but I've read up all the lore because it's lore. I'm okay. I'm kind of a nut for that stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I do have a question that I'm not sure that you can fully answer, but it might just boil down to a yes or no. We talked a lot about the older settings. At least Matt and I do all the time because we've been doing this forever. With now like Dragonlance coming back, is there a possibility that another eye might be turned to some older content to maybe get refreshed or updated? I know fans ask about settings all the time, and yes, there's a certain amount of us that will always do it ourselves. But is that something that internally that you guys are talking about of what older content might actually be viable for an update? I
mean, there has been nearly 50 years of content created for Dungeons and Dragons, and that is a lot, right? There's not a lot of properties out there that you can say that about. So there's always going to be things that age well or did not age well or need to be updated. I mean, we saw that with Ravenloft, and going back to a lot of the old Domains of Dread were pretty tropey, and we're like, hey, we can make that a lot better and make it a lot more fun for this audience now. So there is always that possibility. For me, it's like it has to be something that adds to the current state of the D&D multiverse, right? Like, so with Spelljammer having the fact that it is not just, we're going to take all of the stuff that was in second edition Spelljammer. It's not that at all. It's basically just take, there's some inspirations. We're going to change and adapt it and experiment with this form factor of having 3 volumes in one and making the adventure written in a way to be much more episodic. Like it's very different from even the conception of way Spelljammer was back in the 90s. So that's why I think Perkins was excited to go into it and want to add his specific kind of ideas and spins and his experience to it. Same thing with Dragonlance, where if we were just going to port Dragonlance from the Chronicle novels that everybody loves, I don't think it would be worth it. I don't think it would really have an audience. Honestly, I would have some audience amongst probably the members of this call who have the nostalgia for that stuff. But honestly, that's not the major people who are purchasing Dungeons and Dragons right now. I think it has to have something that feels new and different and additive to what's available out there. And so that's why I think having the board game aspect, as well as this kind of idea of the ongoing war as a backdrop to adventure, is something that we have not yet done before in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. So I think that's kind of exciting. So I don't think every setting is like that quite right now that's been made. And if I'm perfectly honest, I mean, I talk to the designers, I know them well. I'm not the one that they ask for what we should make next. But my personal thought is, let's get some new fucking settings out there. Let's get some things that are interesting and more about now, similar to the way Eberron was a breath of fresh air in the 2000s. like what's the 2020 setting that is going to be created right now, right? Like I think that's the type of thing that's more exciting. Dungeons and Dragons is certainly has a certain level of nostalgia built up with it, but as we've been talking, it's a storytelling framework that should be about what's modern and what's now and what's going on in the world. So that's my 2 cents. I'd rather than go back and rehash Birthright or Mystara or whatever, I'd rather create new settings.
Why you gotta say Mystara, man? I don't know.
Sorry.
But I think we're running out of time, so I think we're going to go for a last call here. So, Liz, any last questions for Greg?
I think we pretty much covered it. I think we pretty much covered everything I had down on my list.
All right, Matt?
Great.
I'll ask one that I thought Liz was going to ask, but she isn't. So, is there any idea if you guys are working towards something where I spend a certain amount of money on a hardcover book and I automatically get the book for D&D Beyond? Perhaps I pay more. I'm not saying I shouldn't have to pay more, but a one-stop purchase type thing, like where I don't have to buy it twice.
I mean, I figured I wouldn't be the first person to make this request because, wow, that would be super convenient.
Yeah, I'm not even saying that there shouldn't be like a secondary cost to it. I'm just saying I really wish I didn't have to actually make 2 transactions to do this, because I have ADD and it's real hard for me to remember to do that. And plus it means I can't, like, I'd like it if I could go buy the book from my local game store, but get something where I could then get the book on D&D Beyond rather than, have to buy the thing twice. I get that there's limitations and problems, but is this something anyone's talking about? I can't be the first person to mention that.
No, by far, you are not the first person to mention that.
Probably not the 1,000.
I'm also going to say that's probably not one that has a clear answer right now that can be publicized or anything, right?
It really doesn't. And I think what's really important to note is that it's something that reminds me of the people who complained when No Man's Sky first came out, and they're like, "Oh, I thought it was going to be multiplayer. It'll take 2 weeks. Just make it multiplayer and make it a massively multiplayer game."
I'm aware it would be really freaking hard.
It's really hard. There's no good way to do it. Unfortunately, is what we have. That's why it's been talked about for so long, right? I think the instinct is there. We want to remove barriers to people who want to play the game. I think the acquisition of D&D Beyond is a step in the right direction there, and that's probably all I can say on that front. But I think it is something that we are definitely talking about and trying to find a solution that doesn't create more problems, if that makes sense.
That's always the trick when you because everything has snags, and you may not know about the snags until after they show up.
Right.
I know.
As many people have said, like, I mean, I'll just say one example is not to cut you off, but just to be like, hey, why don't you just put a code in a book? Well,
then you can't have that book open on the shelf.
Yeah. Right. And then all of a sudden you get shrink wrap. And then like, okay, well, what if, people can shrink wrap books. What if they open up the book, they take the code and then they shrink wrap it again and put it on there? Like, there's just so many ways that can be exploited that is not ideal for the consumers. And I think even though, like I said, the instinct is there to try to remove those barriers, again, we just don't want it to be like, well, that feels bad.
Yeah. I mean, the whole problem, I love having a physical book in front of me. Like, I have my Wild Beyond the Witchlight book on my shelf over here, and it is covered in sticky notes and like little tabs that I've put in so I can flip through it and reference things. But I also own it on D&D Beyond, because going into D&D Beyond, if I'm looking for something, I can just search for it and find it immediately. And if I'm looking for something that's from a different book that I'm referencing, I can search for it and find it immediately, or it will be linked in line on D&D Beyond and I can just click it. So it's like there are different conveniences, and it's nice to have both. But like Matt said, it's kind of a headache to both spend the money on both and have to remember to get both.
Yeah, for me, it's more the remembering. I don't mind spending the money ultimately because I understand that, that's how you can make these things profitable.
Things cost money.
Yeah, but it is one of those situations where there's a lot of stuff I own here that I just didn't remember. Like, and I'll say this, that Liz's penchant for sharing in campaigns has meant that I haven't had to buy a lot of them again, which is great. And that's something that you guys have done that I think answers this problem a little bit. But yeah, that was my question, because I just wanted to get that in before we left the show.
No, I totally understand. And I think there is I think there's a way to go like digitally to physical. I think the hard part is going physical to digital, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And so I have hope that we'll come up with something that helps out the consumer. But to your point, Liz, I think of it as maybe it's not quite so relevant now, but hopefully you are old enough to understand is like when you had a tape deck in your car, but you listened to it on CD in your house, right? Like, okay, well, you had to buy it in two different formats because there had two very different applications. And I think it sounds probably bonkers and people will yell at me for saying it, but it actually is a much more consumer friendly way to in the current system where you only purchase the things that you are going to use, right? And so if you find convenience and be able to use it on D&D Beyond, buy it there. If you also love having the physical book in front of you when you're playing in front of people and you have it all noted up, you have to buy it there too. And you have that choice. If we combine all those, then it doesn't feel like a choice as much. It feels like, oh, I have to do this extra charge type of thing. And so I think that's what we're trying to avoid is pissing off more fans by not giving them as much choice.
Yeah, and I know there were complaints when Mordenkainen's came out, the Monsters of the Multiverse, and it was out physically, but only as part of a bundle first. And it's like, oh, we have to buy this bundle, and we can't just buy it digitally. And there was another book earlier where it came out digitally earlier than physical because of printing delays. And it was the same thing. Oh, no, I have to buy it. I have to buy the physical copy, and I just want the digital copy, or vice versa. So I don't know if there's a way to win here unless you just there's an option for everything. It's like, and what if I buy a physical book, but I want a copy on Roll20 because that's something totally different. It's like, there are so many things you might want to do.
It is ultimately, I think sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but it's like, it's such a complex thing, right? Like,
yes.
And now in the age, like a lot of people take digital delivery for granted because so many things are just purely digital. But a lot of things that exist in both worlds, like it is, how do you satisfy both without, like Greg said, it's how do you satisfy both without making anybody angry, because that's an easy thing to do. Right. It's one small thing could have cascading effects. Right.
It is so easy. But like Strixhaven, I have a physical copy of Strixhaven. I have a D&D Beyond copy of Strixhaven, and I have a copy of Strixhaven on Roll20. I have like the trifecta of Strixhaven because I'm using it in different formats in different places. Because like with y'all, we play and we just use D&D Beyond for character sheets. And I have another gaming group that I'm running a Strixhaven game for, and we play exclusively in Roll20. So it's like, you gotta have everything everywhere. Digital is so convenient, but it's also added so many complications.
It has, right? And it goes back to that idea I was talking about with collecting, right? That idea that like you have to own it all. And that's the thing I'd like to kind of help to divorce people from. I mean, obviously, the way you were talking about Strixhaven, you had applications for using all three of those formats. I would assume you got whatever it was, $50 of fun out of each one of those formats, and it was worth it to you. If it's not worth it to you, well, then you really do have the option not to buy it, right? Like that is and there is a lot of D&D stuff that is available for free. Like again, like you don't have to pay a cent to play Dungeons and Dragons. The basic rules are available up on the website right now. I think they're available in D&D Beyond for free. You know, you can play with all that without having to buy anything. I think that's the trade-off right here. It's just like, hey, if you want it, you can purchase it. No one's forcing you.
And the nice thing about, D&D Beyond, Roll20, and systems like that are, if one person, if your DM buys it, then they can share it with everyone. And like everyone, it's kind of like, being around a physical table with people. And it's like one person has a pile of books, but everyone can pass them around. So it's really great to see digital tool sets doing that, because otherwise that would turn into a pile of expenses, I suspect.
Exactly. Right.
Now, I was going to say, to move away from the digital discussion, I do have one last question that actually was sent in by a friend of the show that I'm going to ask before we pass it along, or pass to the end of the show here, which is, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tarrasque?
Well, let me see. 1, 2, 3. 3.
I love it. Greg, I do want to thank you very much for joining us today. Is there anything else you want to share or anything you want to plug before we call it good?
Well, I mean, I've got actually, I do have a bunch of stuff. So we're on a podcast as well. My co-host Shelly Bezanola and I are on Dragon Talk. We
Great
interview.
podcast, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're getting up to our 400th episode
Oh my
pretty soon, which is crazy to me. And we have a book coming out later on this fall called Welcome to Dragon Talk, inspiring conversations about people who play D&D, a series of essays around some of our more interesting guests out there. It ranges the gamut from, from kind of Hollywood actors to people who were just doing something really exciting for the community and wanted to tell their stories. So it's, irreverent narratives with me and Shelly talking to each other, but we also do a fair bit of talking about the behind the scenes of marketing Dungeons and Dragons, specifically about like the growth of the D&D community and how that has shifted and changed from the wargaming days in the 1970s to when me and Shelly joined the team, and how our influence kind of, changed the way D&D was thought about kind of in the 5th edition era. So there's a whole, hopefully it appeals to all types of fans of Dungeons and Dragons, as well as podcasting and the community as a whole. I also have a Star Trek podcast called Re-Engage, which is going back to look at all the old episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. Yes. We are in the middle of season 3 right now, so we're getting to really the best part of that series. We've just got back-to-back amazing episodes leading up to that amazing finale and Best of Both Worlds. So if you're interested in going back into sci-fi that basically defined sci-fi for a whole generation of us, it's really fun to go back and be, Gen Xers trying to be like, oh yeah, this is why I am, while also celebrating what was happening when those episodes were first airing. So lots of history and pop culture stuff too, early on before we get to the episode itself. So lots of fun stuff. Check that out. That's you can follow that on Re-Engage TNG on Twitter. But if you just want to find the episodes, they're on wherever you get this podcast, probably Re-Engage.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much. And I'm going to have to binge because I've just restarted watching The Next Generation. I'm almost done myself. So selfishly, thank you.
No problem. I was doing the same thing and I was like, oh man, there's so much here. Like I didn't realize like it's so, because it started in 87 when I was 9. And that was such a formative time in my life, obviously, when you're in that age. And gosh, man, I am Wesley Crusher, a hardcore fanboy, still to this day, even though he's, it makes you want to roll your eyes, but you're like, man, I know you. I know you, Wesley. You're me. You're my people.
Well, thank you very much. For everybody at home, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous donations at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means this podcast and all of our podcasts, the site and community, is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters get to enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to our podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast, or the queue, and an ads-free site experience. Again, Greg, thank you so much for coming in and hanging out with us for a little bit. We appreciate it. And keep doing the good work you're doing, because obviously 5th edition is great. D&D is great right now. So everything that's going, I want to see you keep going. It's good. Keep it going.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks for having me on again. It was always fun to talk and to be as open as I can be about D&D stuff. You all are wonderful. Thank you so much.